Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Wood, Gutmann, and Bogart presents today Navigating Cybersecurity, Responding to Current Threats, and Preparing for What's Coming. On today's call, you have Emily Agramonte and Tommy Johnson from MGA Coalition. They are cybersecurity specialists, along with myself, Luke Hutchinson, with Elite Specialty and Wholesale Insurance Services. For those of you who aren't familiar with Wood, Gutmann, and Bogart, Wood, Gutmann, and Bogart is an insurance broker located in Southern California. They were nice enough to invite us on to speak to you today about cyber liability. Just a reminder that today's seminar is not intended to convey any legal advice. If you have any questions, please reach out to your Wood, Gutmann, and Bogart insurance producer. So our goal today, as we talk through navigating cybersecurity, is to give everybody an update on what's happening in the state of the cybersecurity marketplace, including current claims trends. We wanted to talk a little bit more about who is after your data and the type of breaches that people are experiencing. We also wanted to go through some common breach tactics and help you understand what's happening and how to prepare yourself. We also want to talk through how cybercrime impacts different industries. Different folks in different types of business styles have different concerns and different needs, so we'll address some of those. We also wanted to bring in Tommy and help you understand what you can do in the event of a breach, as well as talk to you about best practices to keep your system safe. As we go along, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box, and we will answer those questions as we get through. One of the items that we wanted to jump out and talk about right out of the gate regarding cyber liability pertains to what's currently going on in the marketplace that we're all experiencing, which is the coronavirus pandemic and COVID-19. When we started the year 2020, there were certainly some items that we were worried about. However, I don't think any of us were really looking around the corner to see a global pandemic. And with anything that happens on a mass scale in the bad acting community, the world of global hackers, they're always looking to take advantage of any opportunity that comes in front of them. And the coronavirus has given them exactly that. When everybody started shifting into lockdown, most companies that were able to started moving their workforce from a global IT environment into a work from home. And there were certain situations that have popped up and provided easy access for these hackers to get in and to take advantage of those situations, whether it's poor VPN systems or RDP or employees choosing to click on links. So as we just look back, it's just been an amazing transition over the last 90 days in dealing with some of these items. And we'll touch on a claim specific to COVID-19 a little later on here. But really, the big changes in technology and communication as we navigated through these unprecedented times has certainly been exciting and terrifying at the same time. When we began the year, we were trying to predict what was going to take place in the cyber market, and we have a decent track record going back 25 years to understand the standard types of claims that people have been experiencing and seeing. One of the most common claims examples that we hear about is phishing, where bad actors and hackers are sending out emails to try to get somebody to click on a link and provide their user and password information. And as we've really moved forward into 2020, phishing has evolved. So instead of just basic phishing, now we're starting to see spear phishing. Spear phishing being targeted phishing efforts where bad actors or hackers are looking for people in management roles or in executive roles that have access to accounting information. The goal is gaining control of those accounting informations, whether it's to manipulate an invoice or ask for funds to be transferred or ask for personally identifiable information. But instead of just casting a wide net and seeing what they can get, these bad actors are now targeting specific individuals. We've also dealt with years and years of data theft. Again, breaches into your computer systems and your data being lost or taken or exposed and used for nefarious purposes. Unfortunately or fortunately, systems have become more sophisticated, and hackers have realized instead of trying to take out these large amounts of data and then sell them on the dark web, it's more efficient and a better business practice just to lock up your data and then demand that you pay a ransom to get it back. So the rise of enterprise ransomware has seen significant increases just in 2020, but even going back the last 18 months. Again, in the past, we've dealt with accounting fraud, both from employee crime and cyber crime. But now, again, these criminals, they're looking for more bang for their buck. So they've moved on to invoice manipulation. And in some situations, what you'll find is your email system is compromised, and that can even include Office 365. Your passwords are compromised, and these criminals are laying in wait. They're monitoring your emails that are coming in and out. And when they see an opportunity to manipulate somebody to change where the funds are supposed to be transferred or change who the payee or payor is on an invoice, they're taking advantage of that. And unfortunately, for the most part, these all seem like very legitimate emails. You don't even know what's happening. If it's somebody in accounting or your COO, whoever it may be, it all looks legitimate. And unfortunately, until somebody says, hey, where's my money? Or your bank saying, hey, you're short $50,000, you don't even know that has happened. Again, in the past, we've seen DDoS or denial of service attacks where these bad actors will overwhelm a website just to the point where it can't even take in any business, which is just another form of cyber terrorism. Versus today, instead of just overwhelming websites, they're utilizing artificial intelligence and other systems and other software out there to actually perform scans. And they're scanning on a wide basis, looking for systems that, for lack of better terms, have their doors and windows open. It's like a burglar driving down the street looking for an easy house to break into. These scans can tell what the type of servers that you use are, what type of systems you have in place, maybe some defense systems you do or don't have in place. And if the software that they use has known vulnerabilities for certain servers, and they ping a server and say, oh man, look, that server has the exact same old patch that the last person we just broke into was, it makes it easier for them. So instead of just, again, trying to throw everything around and see what sticks, they are doing their homework, and they're very sophisticated and prepared. Again, in the past, hackers have wanted to make sure that when they do ask for money or they do hold your system ransom, at the end of the day, if you paid, they would give you the key back to your information, and everyone moves on their merry way. Because what's a hacker without ethical standards, right? But unfortunately, in 2020, we've seen a new version of that, where these hackers are not only holding systems hostage and demanding and receiving ransoms, but then they're turning around and taking some of the information that they found or communications with the ransom negotiators or with you and your IT team, and they're then publishing that for the world to see. So not only did they collect money from you or from your insurance company, but they've also now exposed the fact that you were breached. So it's a very interesting trend. In some situations, it's maybe the hackers didn't get as much money as they wanted, or they just felt compelled to put that information out for the world to see just what happened to you. So again, we'll continue to monitor that. We came into 2019 in the past with having to deal with the GDPR, which is a regulatory law that applies in the EU or anybody conducting business in Europe. And in 2020, starting in January, we saw California enact the California Consumer Protection Act, designed to implement standards for companies when it comes to the data that they hold from their consumers, allowing their consumers to opt out, not to sell it to third parties. And we've also seen BIPA come to the front of the room, which is the Biometric Impairment Act, which, as we talk a little bit further on, we'll touch on things like contract tracing and employee screening, and those types of things fall into that category of keeping information about employees, again, their well-being, their health, things like have they contracted the coronavirus all fall in there, and we want to make sure that that we're paying attention there. On the line again is Emily. Emily, I'm going to have you just review this information we have on the funds transfer and email compromise incidents that you've been seeing at Coalition.
Sure. So all brokers and even insureds have been wanting to know, like, what has been What kind of claims have you guys been seeing in the last 60, 90 days since COVID hit? How are the bad actors acting? Like, what are they trying to do these days? So what's really crazy to see is, these bad actors want to be paid quickly nowadays. So we're seeing a huge uptick in funds transfer fraud. So, some carriers call it social engineering, cyber crime, but it's, where somebody is duped into paying, a bad actor. So we're seeing a huge jump in that. And, the reason behind that is because it's a quick pay. It's pretty much sometimes instant. They don't have to do too much work. Somebody just clicks a link or agrees to wire money, and it happens very quickly. Because, with ransomware, it could take a little bit of time. There's negotiations, they could be lying around in your computer for a while. So we haven't really seen much change there yet. And if you look at business email compromise, that can be tied, right back to funds transfer or something called invoice manipulation, that Luke just mentioned. But if, we're seeing insureds, experience security failures, which is causing, business email compromise, and somebody's getting into their system and sending out fraudulent invoices to their customers. So, I mean, that's an example of, things that we're seeing, a lot right now, given, everybody's working from home. The security that you have, working remotely isn't the same that you had, back when everybody was in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an interesting just transition as people are starting to report these claims coming in with funds transfer and email compromise incidents. While I have you on, Emily, we also had this case study that you sent over regarding funds transfer fraud, and this is one of your insureds at Coalition, correct?
This was. And Tommy, you're very familiar with this slide as well, if you have anything that you want to add as I'm going through it. But Coalition has had so much success this year, and, since we have started business 3 years ago, in clawing back funds for our insureds. So we offer some of the highest sublimits for funds transfer, but we're also, trying to get that back for our insureds as well. So it's a win-win. But, we received, an email. One of our insureds received, a fraudulent email on a Friday and paid it. And on Monday morning called Coalition and, was just absolutely frantic. They realized that they had wired out $1.3 million. They are actually a nonprofit. So you can probably guess that a lot of nonprofits don't just have, an extra $1.3 million laying around. So when they realized that this money was now gone, I mean, they were just absolutely, devastated. We were on the phone with them within 15 minutes, and we immediately started the clawback, or this is 5 minutes, so it's even better than 15. But we immediately started, the clawback of the funds, and we work with counsel and forensic investigation. We have deep ties with, the security sector and the FBI, so we were able to claw back pretty much that entire amount. Less $500. But after this situation happened, we then wanted to educate the insured on how to, prevent something like this from ever happening again. And, Tommy will touch on this on a later slide, but, enabling 2FA and then, obviously implementing some kind of dual control when it comes to funds transfer. But this is just how quickly it can happen. On April 8th, everything's, doing, the insured just going about their business. And within a couple of days, they've wired out $1.3 million. And unfortunately, this isn't, an isolated event. We see companies all the time, wiring out this kind of money. It's the number one claim that the market is seeing, funds transfer fraud. And yeah, it's probably just going to continue to increase at this point.
Yeah, it's easier just to take the money instead of demanding it from somebody, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, we're continuing to hear that. And if you review cyber liability policies, you'll see funds transfer is a point of a hot topic as everybody's trying to determine just what to do and how to address it, because it has become, again, the main issue. Whereas I think if you went back 6, 7, 8 years ago, you had to worry more about third-party liability and losing the data of others, versus again, that's not a very successful business endeavor for these bad actors. And that takes
Mhm.
us, right into, who is actually after your data. And it would surprise people into who is really out there. I think probably the most common ones we run into today, or we hear about today, are these state-sponsored actors. And by state-sponsored, these are people that work in, well, minus before lockdown, they were working in nice office buildings, Class A space. They're well funded. They have roundtables trying to determine just who to target, who to go after. They're doing their research, and it's amazing just the level of sophistication that they have. Unfortunately, in the world of cyber and cyber crime, for those of us on the good side, we're always 2 or 3 steps behind because all we can ever do is react to what the new claims trends are. And we're continuing to see it. I was, following a breach trend that came in late last week, and it was a group from Russia, but another breach that was out there that we were touching on was actually sponsored through a group out of the United States. At least that's where their servers were based. You see it from China, you see it from India, you see it everywhere. Whether it's, corporate espionage or people trying to gain additional information, or really, again, just trying to wear down systems. Obviously, we're all very familiar with the concerns around meddling in elections and things like that. It's very easy for outside forces to get in to different systems. And not to be lost are the dark web criminals, those that have been in the cybercrime game for many years. They don't necessarily have the level of sophistication that the state-sponsored actors have, but they're still just as willing and able to penetrate systems and to get in. And sometimes they're just there to make a name for themselves. Other times they're there to try to get themselves some Bitcoin as well. But they're not to be forgotten. They're still out there lurking in the dark. And then you have data miners, where they are utilizing computer systems to perform cryptojacking. And cryptojacking is, again, kind of a new coverage that we're seeing in the world of cyber liability, but it alludes to providing coverage for systems that have been taken over to essentially act as data mining for Bitcoin or other currencies. And it can just take up low amounts of data on your computer, but it is a bit of a pain to get it out once it's in there. Before we transition to Emily talking about the different industries that are impacted by cyber, one of the things that I hear all the time on the broker side is people saying, well, I don't really work on the internet, or my company doesn't do business online. I don't even have a website, so I'm not concerned about having a breach. Where in the reality, again, as we talked about earlier, criminals are now scanning everybody. So even if you do have a website, but you don't conduct a lot of business, you're actually going to be a better target. Anybody that has an email system is a target for cyber liability, cyber crime. And there's really no company too small. It's easier to go after the smaller companies. In fact, they don't have the same sophistication. They don't have the different levels of IT. They don't necessarily have the access to VPNs or remote desktops or things along those lines. They're just using a basic firewall from McAfee and hoping for the best. But they have no regular scans and no way of keeping their systems clean. So everybody's a candidate, and I think at any point in time, every business at some point in time, will experience some sort of a cyber loss, whether that's just an email compromise or again clicking on a link and your system's taken over by pop-up ads or virus or Trojan, whatever it may be. But Emily, I'm going to hand it over to you to
Sure.
again just touch on the different industries.
Yeah. So when you think of like cybersecurity and when you're talking to the end client, a lot of the times, it's really easy to come up with claims examples for certain industries, like, I mean, hospitals and restaurants or online retailers, because, our mind can easily come up with something like, oh, well, they accept credit cards, so they have an exposure or they have patient data. But there's certain classes of business that don't really probably have very much I was going to say first party data, but they might not have, customer data. They might not store personally identifiable information, and they might not store personally health information. So some of those industries are like contractors and construction, and property owners. I've been getting a lot of questions about property owners exposure with regards to cyber risk. So What I usually like to say is, if you are using a business email, you are at risk for a cyber event, because ransomware and funds transfer, which are the number one and number two claims that the market is seeing right now, both really don't have to do with uninsured storing any personally identifiable information. So just by having, a business email, you could receive, an email that looks like a legitimate request from your vendor, from your tenant, and you could pay something and then be out of that money. Same thing goes for ransomware. You could click an email inside that comes to your inbox, and all of a sudden your computer is compromised. Another issue that I like to talk about with industries like contractors or property owners, if you have a security failure, with your email, and somebody's able to hack your email, and then they send out an email to one of your vendors or your tenant, for example, they could either pass on malicious, malware into that third party system, and then you would get sued, or that contractor would get sued, or that property owner would get sued. So there are lots of claims examples that we're actually seeing with these classes of business. So just because they don't have PII, or one of my other favorite cyber objections is, well, I outsource everything. That's probably a lot. Contractors are definitely outsourcing, they're hosting things in the cloud, but the state notification laws read, if the data was trusted in your care, custody, and control, it's your responsibility to notify. So even if you're storing information in the cloud and the cloud is breached, you would be required to notify. And what's also interesting is you're required to notify based on where those customers reside. So they could be spread out all over the country. And then you would be required to comply with multiple state notification laws. And if you've ever even just tried to read California state notification law, then you would probably be like, yeah, I probably would want, an expert to handle a situation like this, if an event came up. So restaurants, manufacturers, I'll talk a little bit about restaurants. You have to worry about your POS system. Again, one of my favorite, objections is, well, I outsource everything. I outsource our POS system, so we don't have the exposure. They would take care of it. I like to, tell them, like, let's put yourself in the customer's shoes. If you're a restaurant, and you have a breach at your restaurant, and your customers are affected, and they have to go through like all the troubles of getting new cards, they have to get credit monitoring and all that stuff. If you don't handle a breach correctly, like right out of the gate, you're way more likely to lose those customers forever, or they're going to take their business and they're going to take their business elsewhere. And then there's always a plaintiff's attorney that's hiding around every corner looking for a breach that happens. So a class action can come up against you too. So when people like to say, well, I outsource my POS system, try to give, your clients, like, how would you feel, if you were a customer and that company, didn't handle things rightly? Because, as a customer, I don't care who, Larocco's Pizza outsources their POS system to. I did business with that pizzeria. Like, I want to be made whole by them. And that's, a good, claims example that you guys can use in there. With manufacturers, one of the biggest, exposures they have is business interruption exposure. If their systems get shut down because of somebody hacks them, or because they update their software and it causes a systems failure, that's definitely something where, if they were down, the rest of the supply chain then, also fails, and it's just a whole bunch of first party costs. And it could also result in a third party loss, where the rest of the supply chain then sues the manufacturer because, they didn't, they get messed up the whole thing, right? Something really, one of the nuanced coverages that I know Coalition is doing, and I don't know about the rest of the marketplace, is pollution coverage. And this is really cool for a lot of other industries besides manufacturers. But I mean, you can get pretty sci-fi with a lot of these claims examples. But like for this one, if it's a manufacturer, and somebody hacks into their system, and some kind of chemicals get dispersed into the soil or into the ground, there could be first party costs and third party costs associated with that. We had a winery too recently where they were really sold on this pollution coverage because they're dealing with certain things out in the fields. Hospital, pretty straightforward here. You have to worry about rogue employees that are stealing healthcare records. You have to worry about bad actors holding up medical records, threatening to expose those individuals' healthcare records if they don't get paid a certain amount. So that would be like a ransomware event. I'm still convinced one of these, I feel like that's where healthcare incidents are probably going, is that they're going to start like making this information public. If a big hospital like Cedars-Sinai has a bunch of celebrities' healthcare information, it's probably only a matter of time until somebody gets a hold of their system and demands a very pretty penny to safeguard that. And then back to e-commerce. So any company that's doing business online, whether it's retail, they might be a wholesaler, which they might be able to direct you to other websites, but with DDoS attacks, somebody can flood your network and kick you offline. We see something like 60% of florists, the week before Valentine's Day get hit with DDoS attacks. And that's, because that's their biggest day of the year. And we see them get flooded, they knock their network offline, and they can't take orders. And so some of these criminals, they're aware of, how businesses are run and, the busiest times for people. So that's just a little bit about, some of these affected industries. If you guys have any questions specifically at the end of the call, I'm happy to talk, more about, contractors and property owners, and I can help you guys come up with some more claims examples.
No, that's perfect. And actually, we do have one question. Maybe you can expand on what you meant by the term clawback.
Oh, sure. So after a funds transfer event occurs and we're able to get on the phone with the insured, we immediately go to the bank and we start something called the clawback. You have to demand that they start trying to retract the money that was paid out to the bad actor. Sometimes it's like sitting in limbo, right? Because it hasn't hit the bad actor's account yet. And if you move quick enough, you are able to actually get that money back. And that's, what makes Coalition so much different from traditional carriers, is because like that previous slide I touched on, we were actually on the phone with the insured within 5 minutes. Whereas a lot of other carriers, it could be several hours or even, days before breach counsel's involved, but we're actually, proactively working with the banks and the FBI to actually bring those funds before they hit the bad actor's account.
Yeah, that's especially important if you're insured for it and you have, say, a $50,000 retention and you're able to get most of that funds back. I would have to imagine that helps you in the long run.
Absolutely. And that is not going to sit on your loss runs for the end of time, that you had a $250,000 funds transfer fraud that's going to affect your insurance pricing for, the next 5 years. So it's definitely something, I love how we're doing it and doing it differently, over here.
Yeah, if it were to equate it to the general liability side of the world, it's almost like subrogation in the fact that you're trying to get some of those funds back.
Mm-hmm. And if we can't, we pay it, right? But we're trying.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of takes us into the breach response side. We can kind of both touch on this, but tell me a little bit about what your stance is, and we've already talked about a few of them, but from just a ransomware, what's kind of the first steps that you're asking your policyholders to go through when they experience a ransomware event?
So for us, definitely call us immediately is, what we always recommend. Tommy, do you have anything? I feel because like you're definitely on the security side, like when a ransomware event gets called in, what would you say?
Yeah, sure. I would say you hit the nail on the head. The best thing you can do is get us on the phone as quickly as you can. Time is definitely of the essence with ransomware. Having good backups is extremely important. So like testing your backups, if you can restore from backups, that could save a lot of money in the long run. But yeah, I would basically say like call your carrier, call your incident response company. Basically just be quick about it. And having good backups is huge. I will say that now, because people are catching on that like backups are really important to mitigate ransomware events, the bad guys are actually saying, well, if you don't pay the ransom, we'll leak all your data on the dark web, or we'll publish it. So there is additional cost potentially, even if you do have good backups, with like notification because of that. But yeah, I'd basically say speed and contacting your insurance carrier or your incident response team is probably the most important.
And
Tommy.
if there's a situation, oh, go ahead, Luke.
No, go ahead, Emily.
Okay. So even if they're in the event that, backups aren't an option and, you have to go down the route to, pay this ransom demand, a unique thing about how Coalition operates with this service is we actually front the money for our insureds and pay, the Bitcoin wallet, who then pays the bad actor, versus the insured having to come up with, a 6 or 7 figure, amount of money to pay the bad actor. The rest of the marketplace is, it's called reimbursement coverage for this coverage section, whereas we are pay on behalf of. So that's just something that, you guys should know when you're reviewing other carriers' policies.
Yeah, and that's important on the pay on behalf, especially if they're demanding cryptocurrency. The vast majority of companies don't have a stockpile of, Bitcoin or Ethereum or name your crypto just sitting in wait, right? So, and usually these ransoms come with a time demand. So if you're going to try to get out into the marketplace and purchase yourself enough Bitcoin to be able to pay off your ransom, chances are it's not going to happen. As we look to just continue down the trend here, with notifications and public relations, you touched on it a little bit earlier when it comes to the different places that you have to notify. But with all the new regulations on the various ballots, around the U.S. and again the GDPR in the U.K., what is the notification process now when it comes to the various different regulatory bodies that need to be notified?
Right. I mean, that's another thing, because you have to literally comply with many state notification laws and how each state operates. With CCPA, I expect that a lot of other states will soon follow. And you're going to want to try to get as broad of coverage, for these kinds of new regulations, right? A lot of the time, and I'll just speak to our CCPA coverage because it has basically just a nuance, I should say. Most, coverages for regulatory have to come out of a security failure or a data breach. And you want to make sure that you have, a non-breach trigger in there. So it could be, everything around CCPA coverage right now is about your privacy policy that's required to be posted on your website. And if your privacy policy says like, hey, like we will not sell your information to third parties, and as a customer, I find out that they're selling, my data to third parties, I can file a suit against that company. And, obviously CCPA, that's going to trigger CCPA coverage under our policy. But yeah, it all just has to go back to, your ability as a small business, like how would you comply with all of those different state notification laws?
Right. And Tommy, maybe you can jump on to help us talk about the data restoration process when it comes to a breach. How are you responding, or what are your response techniques when it comes to trying to get their systems back online?
Yeah, so this actually depends on the backups that they already have in place, right? Because we can't actually we can't just like make them out of thin air, right? So if they're encrypted and they don't have backups, then many times we have to actually pay the ransom. Unless it's like a bad variant of like ransomware or the encryption was sloppy, then we can't just like restore their data unless they have good backups. So I would say the most important thing, and like I said this before, is like having good backups where you're testing restoring from backups, and they're actually segmented off your network, because the bad guys are actually looking for these backups and they're encrypting them too. So if you air gap your backups so they can't be touched by your network, or they're segmented, and you test them, that's going to be the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is, they get the backups, and then, we have to pay the ransom. So yeah, I'll just say
And
robust backups are extremely important.
right, and in the event that you can't back up, let's say client files, like patient data, all that information, the data restoration costs are costs that, a carrier would pay to recreate those files for you. So it's important to have, high limits there. And that's the same for, bricking and hardware replacement. So in the event that, a bad actor, bricks your phone, your laptop, or maybe, a dozen of your company's computers, which basically means that your computer is no longer usable. There's coverage for something like that to actually replace like your physical, computer systems, phones, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Tommy, we'll keep you on here as you already mentioned a few things when it comes to backups, but take us through what you would say are the best practices to be as secure as possible. I mean, we touched on it a little bit earlier. There's no way to stay ahead of what these bad actors and hackers are doing. I mean, it's their livelihood to always be ahead of us. But what can we do, and what can our clients do to maintain their systems as best as possible?
Yep. So like you said, it's their livelihood, and they're doing very well for themselves. But basically, we just have these best practices, and it's important to think of security as defense in depth. So like each one of these individually may not be enough, but like the culmination of doing all these things will make you a much less attractive target for attackers, because they're usually just looking for the lowest hanging fruit. So number one, employee training, passwords. So you want to make sure that passwords are at least 12 characters long and random. I also highly recommend a password manager, so you don't have to write down all these super long random passwords. Basically, they'll generate passwords for you, and then automatically input them. And the reason for this is basically companies will get hacked, and then their databases will get leaked, and these databases sometimes contain your passwords. So the bad guys are looking for old passwords, and they're trying variations of them. They're adding numbers, years on your logins, right? So that's why people say passwords are so weak. So 12 characters long and random, and rotate them frequently. Email links. So basically, you at all cost, you don't want to click links in emails, even emails that you think are from someone they could be spoofed. So just be very careful with email links. Much of the time, attackers use this to phish you and get you to give your credentials up or download malware from a site. HTTPS. So basically, this is encryption on websites. So you don't want to input passwords or personal information on sites that don't have HTTPS. And the way you can check for that is you can click the little green lock by your URL to see if the site is actually encrypted. And basically, what this prevents is someone sitting in between you and the website and reading your data. So a man in the middle attack. So for cell phones, you definitely want to turn off public Wi-Fi. So basically, bad guys will sit below companies in the Starbucks or whatever, and they know the employees have auto connect on the Wi-Fi, because everyone drinks coffee, or most people do. And the cell phones that automatically connect to Wi-Fi will connect to that Starbucks Wi-Fi. So the bad guys, what they'll do is they'll sit in the Starbucks and they'll set up a fake access point to intercept all of your traffic and basically read everything you're doing online. So for cell phones, you want to make sure you turn off automatic Wi-Fi connection. USB drives, don't plug unknown USB drives into your computer. Bad guys will actually, and I used to be a pen tester, and I've done this before, is basically load up USBs with malware and just like drop them in the parking lot outside of like a company, that has worked. That
That's,
yeah.
yeah, these are really good. This is like very interesting stuff.
Backups, I touched on this already, but basically like robust backups are extremely important, especially in ransomware or systems failure. It can literally save you millions of dollars. Just think, if all of your data instantly went away and there was no way to get it back, like what impact would that have on your business, right? It's going to be really expensive. And if you're insured, we'll pay that, but we don't want our, like, some data is just like, you can't put a price on it, right? It's like trade secrets and stuff. So yeah, robust backups, test the backups, and then multiple regions. That basically just means like you want to have your backups in multiple locations or segmented off your network, so that like if there was ransomware, the bad guy can't also encrypt your backups. Multi-factor authentication. So basically what this is when you log in, you're prompted for a like a text or like a code or an authenticator app. Basically, this is just something else that you have that confirms who you are when you log into something. This is probably one of the most important defenses for like individuals and businesses because, like I said before, passwords are so weak. So you want to put multi-factor on pretty much everything you can, especially your email, because the email has the keys to the keys to the castle, because when you reset your passwords, goes to your email. So multi-factor is extremely important. Firewalls, you can put a firewall on your network. Next-gen firewalls will inspect traffic and they can stop some malware. So yeah, firewalls, they can get really expensive, but they are a good defense in depth, especially for businesses. Regular system scans. So basically, these are vulnerability scans which look at what technologies are on your system, and they see like the version number, right? And they know a certain version is vulnerable to this attack. So basically, like if you get regular system scans, it can show technical attack vectors, and then the way to fix those vulnerabilities that are detected, which brings us to the next point, is patch update procedures. So you definitely want to automatically apply patches where you can. So this is basically like updates to your servers. So these very often fix security vulnerabilities. So you definitely want to update as frequently as possible. Data encryption. So basically, you want to make sure, and we touched on this with HTTPS, but you want to make sure that all your data at rest, which means like on your hard drive, and in transit, which means over the wire, is encrypted. This can basically protect against man-in-the-middle attacks. RDP and VPN. So RDP, you do not want to expose RDP for remote access to the internet. We see very, very expensive claims as a result of doing that. We also have a global honeypot network that sees basically like who's attacking what technology, and it is overwhelmingly like the riskiest technology you could possibly expose to the internet. And if you have to use RDP, the way we basically suggest that you do it is put it behind your firewall so it's not exposed to the whole internet, and then have someone access that computer after they VPN'd into your network. That way it's just not exposed for everyone to attack. RDP, there are two main attack vectors. One is Bluekeep, which is a more technical exploit, and the other is credentials. And the bad guys basically log into RDP, then they're inside your network. They exploit the computer, and then they get privileges on your administrator's computer afterwards, or the domain admin. Also, VPNs encrypt data, so they protect you against man-in-the-middle attacks. And then lastly, we have mobile device encryption. So this is super important for notification. So say you have an employee that has a laptop and they take their laptop to Starbucks again because they love coffee. and it gets stolen when they go to the bathroom, right? If there is PII or PHI on that laptop and it's not encrypted, you have to notify. And that can get super expensive. And that can just be avoided by making sure all of your mobile devices are encrypted. So yeah, those are basically just some best practices. Obviously, it can be overwhelming to implement all of these as a list at once, but doing multi-factor or password manager like one at a time, like these defense in depth, each point adds up basically, and it's going to be a lot harder for an attacker to hit someone with all of these than just someone who's not. And the bad guys are looking for the easiest targets. If they see something where it's locked down, then they'll just move on. So yeah.
That's great, Tommy. If you had to, pinpoint any one of these, areas, what would you note as the number one item for a client to go back and implement today?
Probably passwords and MFA. It's just passwords are so weak, and like the bad guys, it takes to exploit like password vulnerabilities is like it's so easy. When people reuse passwords, it's a huge issue, and like when people get like oh, like my Facebook has been hacked or my my Twitter, like much of the time that is just due to passwords, right? It's just these passwords getting leaked when third parties get hacked, and the bad guys are just using those leaks to simply log in. Like there's no hacking involved. So I would say yeah. As far as like for individuals, passwords and multi-factor authentication. And then for businesses, I would say that and VPNs and backups. So.
Right. And you touched on it, but somebody had a question, I think you had mentioned it somewhere in there about brute force attacks.
Yep.
And I think, if you have the strongest password protocol possible, that's going to assist in that. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that happens is like, so like if you have an old password that's like, I don't know, say your password's like spring 2020, right? And then that gets leaked, like a database gets leaked and spring 2020 comes out, right? Then like the bad guy can assume that like on maybe some old accounts or maybe going forward that like, summer 2020 or fall 2020 will be like a valid password. So a lot of the times like with passwords, they'll iterate on old passwords because people just change like one character, which is why it's so important to make them random to help against the brute force stuff.
Right. And just to clarify, I mean, brute force means, bad actor hacker is just overwhelming a login with, various passwords until they find one that works, correct?
Yep.
Perfect. I don't know if it was much of a question, but more of just more of a statement, but we had somebody mention that, all these steps that people can take to prevent a breach are really only as good as the viruses that are out there. I mean, as much as Coalition does to protect their clients, unfortunately, if you don't know what's around the corner, you really can't do much to protect it.
Right, and sometimes it's like, you can enumerate like all of these technical vulnerabilities, and you can do all this stuff and defense in depth, but like an example of what was stated is like phishing, as an example, is like the baseline of risk that applies to everybody, right? So like all companies can get phished, malware can get delivered through there, FTF can happen from phishing. It's one of those things where it's like it's very challenging to deal with, and like it affects everybody, right? So like even if you like do go through the list and do all of these things, like it's still possible that someone could get phished.
Right, because the human element is always going to be there, and you can't fix that.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean that's why that's why we're here, right? To step in when things do go wrong. You can't again prevent everything, and as somebody's mentioned, that's why cyber insurance is so important. You do have that backup and that peace of mind to assist you when times get difficult.
Yep,
I appreciate it, Tommy. As we're coming up to a close, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. Feel free to throw them into the chat. Emily, was there anything else that that you wanted to add?
Unless you guys have any questions, I think I don't have anything else.
Perfect. Well, hey, we really appreciate Tommy, Emily, both of you for joining us today. And for those of you on the call, if you do have questions regarding cyber liability or any of the items that we touched on today, we'd encourage you to reach out to your Wood, Gutmann, and Bogart producer or contact for any questions that you have. If it's something that needs to be escalated up to either myself or Emily or Tommy, we'll get back to you guys just as quick as we can. But again, thank you all for joining us. We really enjoyed ourselves and have a great day.